Right, morning. So I'm here outside the Bristol Old Vic, built in 1766, to introduce you to the Enlightenment. And I'm going to walk along King Street and take you to another Enlightenment venue, Bristol's original Central Library, which opened before the beautiful historic Bristol Old Vic and is now a Chinese restaurant. These are the pubs, the famous Royal Navy Volunteer and King William, both of which were here in the 18th century, and no doubt where such Enlightenment luminaries as Robert Southey, author of History of Brazil, had their drinks after they'd finished in the library for the day. Outside here at the Cathay Rendezvous Chinese restaurant, which has been since the 1980s, here on King Street, in the building which was originally the Bristol Free Library and the Bristol Central Library from the 1730s, when it was constructed on the marshes of the edges of Bristol city centre. And I'm here to talk about the Enlightenment, as the public library is one of the quintessential Enlightenment venues, alongside the theatre, the economic society, the tertulia discussion arena, the cafe, areas where ideas were debated, questioned, critiqued and analysed. All things which, put together, add up to a new way of thinking about man's place in the world, which is how we're kind of summing up the Enlightenment. Conventionally, when we think about the Enlightenment, the names that come to mind are those of French or Scottish philosophers or writers: Adam Smith, David Hume, Voltaire, Montesquieu, Diderot. The thinkers of the 18th century who came to be associated with this idea of reason, logic and applying new critical principles to the world, rather than taking things on faith or trust from previous generations. So therefore, where does Spain fit into that? Where does Spain's American colonies fit into the Enlightenment? Until relatively recently, it was seen as a recipient of the Enlightenment, that the Enlightenment was something that happened in France or in Great Britain, and the ideas of freedom, equality and science that stemmed from those thinkers were transported to Spain and to the American colonies, where they would be enthusiastically adopted by Enlightenment devotees. But historians recently have questioned that idea and have shown instead how many different Enlightenments, similar processes of coming to be more aware of the value of empirical investigation and critical thinking, took place both in Spain and the American colonies, maybe at the same time or maybe a little bit after those that were more celebrated in France, Great Britain and Germany, where publications and the availability of printing presses meant that it was much easier for those writers to develop a degree of dissemination of their work and a degree of celebrity. So once again we see that it's the combination of networks of communication which serve to marginalise the Hispanic world from histories of apparently global processes like the Enlightenment. In Spain, for sure, there were plenty of enlightened thinkers along the same kind of vein. Jovellanos, Feijó, Campomanes, all in the mid to 18th century, developing new ways of writing, new ways of thinking critically about the relationship of the state to the church, new ways of engagement with readers and audiences, either through the theatre or through science. And in South America, and in Mexico and Central America, Similar individuals, most but not all of them men, were also involved in thinking about new ways of producing knowledge, being more critical about received opinion, and applying more scientific methods to the study of the past, the present, and the future. In Colombia, a great example is Francisco Antonio Zea, who was a botanist, a scientist, and a political agitator. Elsewhere, it was often Jesuits who became the most renowned describers, analysers, and critics of colonial society, very much linked to their foundations in Enlightenment thought. So finally then, seeing as it's now starting to rain increasingly heavily, we can see the way in which these enlightened thinkers attempted to apply their ideas to the American colonies in what are called the Bourbon reforms, because they took place under the rule of the Bourbon dynasty in Spain in the second half of the 18th century, but might more usefully be called the enlightened reforms of the Spanish monarchy, which attempted to apply scientific and critical thinking towards the colonies, the way in which tax was collected. He commissioned many maps, many expeditions to ascertain what the landscape held in terms of mining. And so the Bourbon reforms included the sending of Antonio Juan and Jorge Ulloa, two Spanish military men charged with producing an Enlightenment-inspired critique of the American colonies, and also Alexander von Humboldt, the Prussian geologist who was also employed by the Spanish crown. We'll look at texts by both of those in the rest of the week. And so the Enlightened reform attempted to be a more professional administration of Spain's colonies. The effects it had, however, have been much debated, and many people have even assumed that the attempt to apply Enlightenment thinking to the administration of the colonies actually had a counterproductive effect, that it led to the subjects of the colonies feeling the weight of colonial rule for the first time, and therefore rebelling against it, either the comuneros in Colombia or the rebellions of Tupac Amaru and Tupac Katari in Peru and Bolivia. Rebellions which took place in reaction to the reforms enacted by the Enlightenment thinkers, and which have been linked by historians and other critics to the independence rebellions of the early 19th century. But we'll come up to them in a couple of weeks' time.